Uh, this is Steve Sabludowsky, and this evening we have Tyler Bridges. He's going to talk to us about two articles that he wrote. One is called "After Secret Deals Collapses in a Special Session, Last-Minute Changes Still Causing Headaches for Budget Staffers," and the other one is about it's something special. So let's first talk about the article in the Advocate that came out. I read it actually this morning, and it came out on March 17, yesterday. Tyler, good evening. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
So I was fascinated with that article. It really was, because it went into the day and the afternoon of the incredible meltdown of the legislative session that just ended last week. And you took us behind the scenes. And so why don't you tell us what the article was about, and if you don't mind, likewise, just fill us in terms of what you wrote about. Thank you.
Sure. So the backdrop, Steve, is that when the legislature went into a special session on February 14, they had two particular tasks more than anything else. One was to eliminate the $900 million or shortfall mid-year current year budget deficit. This is a deficit that Governor Edwards inherited from Governor Jindal in last year's legislature. So the first task was to eliminate that $900 million shortfall, because that has to be done during the current fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. The second thing was to eliminate most or all of the budget deficit for the following year, which begins July 1st and which is going on right now in the regular session. And they started with $2 billion at the beginning of the special session, and they got down to only $800 million. So they still have another $800 million to deal with there. But the easiest way to raise the taxes during the special session, besides cutting spending and one-time fixes, was to raise sales taxes. And within sales taxes, there's two different ways of doing it. I hope I'm not complicating things, but one was simply to raise 1 cent of the sales tax or even higher. And that was done through House Bill 62 by State Representative Katrina Jackson. Secondly, the idea was to eliminate a bunch of exemptions on the existing 4 cents of sales tax. So right now, Louisiana has 4 cents of sales tax. With the passage of Katrina Jackson's bill, there'll be an additional state sales tax of 5 cents. People might go, well, wait a second. I pay 9 or 10% in sales taxes. That's because of the additional levies from local government. So the focus, particularly of my story, was on the removing of the sales tax exemptions on House Bill 61 by State Representative Jay Morris. And by removing sales tax exemptions, that means that a bunch of activities that are free of sales tax, they would have to begin taxed, and the state would raise more revenue by beginning to tax things, sales taxes that haven't been taxed so far. But the focus of my piece was to report on the final morning of the special legislative session at 7 in the morning on March 9. Speaker Taylor Barra met with Senate President John Alario and two business lobbyists in Alario's office there on the first floor of the Capitol. And the business lobbyists made the case that sales taxes on equipment and machinery purchased for manufacturing should be exempt. In other words, they should not have to be taxed, as many new items were going to be taxed under this bill by Representative Morris. And Alario and Barra made that deal. And then, so the Senate went ahead and passed Morris's bill that afternoon with that exemption for the business community, for, again, the machinery and equipment purchased for manufacturing. So the bill then had to go over to the House that afternoon for final approval. And so it went over to the House at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, only 2 hours left before the session. And at that point, Morris looked at the bill and noticed that business had gotten that exemption for manufacturing. And Morris had been dead set on having that exemption be in the bill, not be in the bill, I'm sorry, that he thought that big business pays too little in taxes, so they should not get that tax break in the bill. So he had the House not accept the Senate's version of the bill, that then threw the bill into what's called conference committee or reconciliation, where the two sides then have to come up with a final bill. And meanwhile, the clock is ticking down to end the special session, and the amount of money that would be raised were somewhere around $66 million. And so the legislature and the governor desperately needed that money. But Morris, as the sponsor of the legislation, he could simply kill his bill. It was up to him. So he then forced the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, the two most powerful members of the legislature, to back down and to agree to put that tax back in his bill. And this caused incredible uncertainty, and the drafters had to redraft the bill. And meanwhile, they were also having to redraft other bills, and this caused a big, giant traffic jam in the bills that were finally given, brought over to the Senate to try to pass in the final minutes, and then the House. And the legislature almost didn't pass these revenue bills, which would have been just catastrophic in terms of the running of LSU and UNO and Delgado and the state's public hospitals. So, but in the end, Representative Morris, a Republican from Monroe, got his way. The tax break for business, they didn't get it. And the House and the Senate passed his bill in just the last 5 minutes of the legislative session that just concluded.
So the difference between his bill and the Jackson bill, the Jackson bill was HB 62.
Right.
Okay, so Jackson's bill,
House Bill 62, ended up being a 1 cent increase in the state sales tax. Republicans wanted to go even higher as to raise money, but the Democrats, particularly the Black Caucus, said no, it's only going to go 1 cent because that is a regressive tax that hits the poor harder. But also within the 1 cent, a bunch of exemptions were carved out for various industries. So at one point it was called a clean penny with no exemptions. But over time, in the final version that was passed, it got dirtied up. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of the House Bill 61, which was Morris's bill, was to clean up the existing 4 cents of sales tax. In other words, take off a bunch of the exemptions and exclusions that exempted them from state sales taxes. And in the end, a bunch of those exemptions were removed under Morris's bill, but not as many maybe as some people thought. But again, the big fight in the end was over whether the business community would get the exemption included or not in the bill, or exempted from the bill for equipment and machinery purchased for manufacturing.
Now that exemption is only for 3 months. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little complicated. In Katrina Jackson's House Bill 62, again, the one that raises the sales tax, the business community loses that exemption for manufacturing for 3 months.
Okay.
And then they get it for the next 2 years that the bill is in effect. So for 3 months, one presumes they won't purchase machinery. They'll wait until that exemption is restored. And then with House Bill 61, Morris's bill, again, which was the ultimate one that was the subject of the secret meeting, the exemption is lost, but it goes down over time during the next 2 to 3 years.
I see. So right now we're looking at, I think it's been reported, 70 million shortfall.
Yeah, as I was explaining earlier, there's a $70 million shortfall in the current fiscal year, and next week the Edwards administration will have to lay out who's going to take those cuts. And then while the legislature is meeting in the regular session right now, they're facing an $800 million shortfall that even the most anti-tax Republicans don't seem to have a plan just to solely cut $800 million in what is about a $9 billion budget. So that makes likely a second special session after the regular
Right.
session ends in June.
Yeah, I had interviewed Stephen Wagenspach last week,
Right.
and he'd mentioned he said that we have a spending problem, a structural budget problem, and we have a revenue problem. I was really surprised to hear him say the latter. It really was.
Well,
I think I mean,
yeah, and from the perspective of the business community, what they want to happen is to have taxes raised on individuals, particularly the sales tax,
mhm.
so they don't lose their tax subsidies that they get that are in the tax code.
Right. He also said that I mean, he'd like to see the income tax. There'd be a revision of the income tax where more people would be taxed. The income tax rate would drop, I think, to like 5%, since there's three layers right now.
Well, there's
And,
various
yeah,
definitions of tax reform. That's a word that we hear bandied about a lot, Steve. Under the broadest definition that I think I'm familiar with, it generally talks about eliminating loopholes and tax breaks. You know, if you've got one, you don't want to lose it.
right.
Either individuals or corporations. But if you eliminate a bunch of those tax breaks, that allows that means the government's going to collect more revenue, and that would indeed allow the state to either establish a single flat rate for either income or companies, or to have a graduated rate, but maybe a lower one than what's in place today.
Right. Right. Well, that's any predictions? Any long-term predictions?
I think the thing to look for is that to see the progress that the legislature makes, in fact, in actually making tax reform. There's a blue ribbon panel that is now meeting to look at the whole tax system. Senator J.P. Morrell is going to have his Senate Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee look at all the different tax breaks that separately to see which ones, if it's possible to determine which ones are working and which ones aren't. So that will all set the stage for and next year when they can raise taxes again to see what kind of restructuring of the tax code they can do. But going back to House Bill 61 and 62, the ones that dealt with the sales taxes, every time that you're adding back a tax break, which is what they ended up doing, that moves in the opposite direction of tax reform. So that suggests that while people like the idea of tax reform in theory, the actual practice will be hard to